Hey folks, tonight we're going to slip quietly into the soft, humid haze of the Mississippi Valley and walk the sun-baked earth paths of Cahokia, a city that was once the largest metropolis in what's now the United States. Picture it. You're standing on a wooden platform overlooking a sea of thatched rooftops, smoky fires curling lazily into a wide Midwestern sky, while a drum beats steadily somewhere in the distance. You might hear it and think, I didn't know ancient America had rush hour traffic. But yes, centuries before skyscrapers or interstate highways, there were traffic jams here, made of people, baskets, and occasionally runaway turkeys. So before you settle in too deep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now turn off the lights, switch on your fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin tonight's journey together. You step through the grass, your bare feet pressing softly into earth still warm from the day. Ahead, rows of dwellings curve like fish scales along dirt avenues, their clay walls dyed red and ochre. The scent of wet wood, ash, and mashed corn fills the air, earthy and sweet. You're in Cahokia around the year 1050, and you're not alone. Roughly 15,000 others live here, maybe more, which means it's denser than most medieval European cities at the time. That's not a typo. This was North America's great city before cities were even a thing here. With a network of plazas, pyramidal mounds, and vast ceremonial spaces, Cahokia was more than a town. It was a statement. And just over there, looming high above the rooftops, is Monk's Mound. You crane your neck. At over 100 feet tall, it's the largest earthen structure in the pre-Columbian Americas. Built by hauling baskets of dirt one by one, it took thousands of hands and decades of dedication. If your Fitbit counted mound building steps, you'd hit your goal before breakfast. Now here's your first strange detail. Next to Monk's Mound stood a massive circle of wooden poles, nicknamed Woodhenge by modern archaeologists. It likely marked solstices and equinoxes. Yes, it was basically a prehistoric calendar. And no, it didn't come with reminders or emoji. But life here wasn't all ceremonies and solar alignments. You wander toward one of the neighborhoods and find yourself by a cluster of homes where women are grinding corn, children are tossing stones into a muddy stream, and a man in a bird mask is painting symbols on bark strips. These strips may be used for record keeping or offerings. We're still not entirely sure. The truth is, Cahokia's writing system hasn't been confirmed. Did they write? Maybe. Did they carve symbols into copper or shells? Possibly. Did archaeologists argue about this over lukewarm coffee? Definitely. You pass by a series of rectangular plots, gardens. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, grow together in complementary harmony. Corn climbs tall, beans spiral up the stalks, and squash sprawls to shade the soil. It's clever, it's efficient, and it kind of makes you feel like your solo basil plant on the windowsill needs to do more with its life. Still, as lively as Cahokia seems, something is off. The ceremonial center is perfectly planned, but outside it, houses are packed tightly, sometimes built on top of older ones. A lot of people are squeezed into a tight space. That's not just a sign of growth. It might mean stress, resource pressure, or maybe even refugees from smaller towns that couldn't sustain themselves. Historians are still debating this. Was Cahokia an inviting beacon of prosperity or a forced refuge during hard times? As you drift through the city, the sky shifts into deep blue. Fires are being lit. The air thickens with smoke and chatter. Drums beat again, slower this time. You pass a gathering circle. Dancers move in flickering firelight, feathers and beads catching every glow. There's chanting, there's laughter, there's even a guy falling asleep upright. Cahokia nightlife, apparently. And then you notice the mounds again, all 120 of them scattered across the landscape. Some are flat-topped, like Monk's Mound. Others are conical, possibly burial sites. These weren't casual backyard projects. Each one represents a massive communal effort. Some contained bodies, others only offerings. One had a platform with a dozen young women sacrificed around a central figure. It's dark, it's disturbing, but it tells you something. Cahokia wasn't just about maze and math. It had rulers, power struggles, and rituals we still don't fully understand. You lie back on the grass just outside the central plaza. Stars twinkle above. The Mississippi winds nearby like a sleeping serpent. Somewhere, a bird calls in the dark, maybe symbolic, maybe just a very loud bird. Either way, Cahokia continues around you, breathing, building, wondering, just like you. You wake up with a start, not because something's wrong, but because someone's shaking a rattle at sunrise. In Cahokia, you don't get a snooze button. The day begins with ceremony, with intention. You shuffle toward the central plaza again. It's already buzzing. Traders from surrounding regions have arrived, bearing obsidian from the Rockies, shells from the Gulf, and copper from the Great Lakes. This isn't a village fair. It's a sprawling, sophisticated economy. The elite live near the mound's base. You, if you're lucky, might get a hut within a reasonable walking distance of daily fish stew. Here's your next core fact. Cahokia wasn't isolated. It was the heart of a vast trade network that crisscrossed the continent. That means someone paddled, walked, and hauled goods for hundreds of miles just to get here. So if you've ever complained about commuting more than 20 minutes, take a moment. Now, while most people are trading beads or smoked fish, you're following a line of priests in elaborate regalia, painted robes, feathered capes, and copper gorgets that shine in the morning light. They ascend Monk's Mound slowly. You join a curious group watching from below. Up there, decisions are made, ceremonies conducted, maybe astronomical observations too. From that perch, the leaders, likely a ruling elite or paramount chief, can look over the entire city, both literally and symbolically. But what was that power built on? Was it charisma, religion, fear? And here's where things get weirder. You've heard whispers about ritual feasting, huge events where hundreds gather for food, music, and political bonding. These weren't potlucks. They were performative, strategic. You give people food, they give you loyalty. It's politics with a side of venison. Still, not everyone was feasting. In a burial site not far from the central precinct, archaeologists found dozens of bodies, carefully arranged. Many young women, some missing heads or hands. It suggests ritual sacrifice, a chilling reminder that Cahokia had a shadow side. Some scholars argue this proves a theocratic society where leaders claimed divine connection. Others say it reflects a culture of prestige burials. The truth? Likely both. And a few academic shouting matches. So you head away from the main complex, wandering into a quieter neighborhood. The houses here are smaller, patched with reeds, clustered around shared courtyards. You hear someone playing a flute. Children chase each other. A woman stirs something pungent in a clay pot, maybe sumac stew. The city has rhythm, you realize, a pulse. Days move between ritual and rest, trade and toil. It's mesmerizing and exhausting. You stop by a pond where someone has made floating offerings of carved wood and feathers. Are they prayers, messages, maybe just art? Either way, it feels sacred. You almost don't want to breathe. Then a joke lands in your brain. Imagine if Cahokia had a Yelp page. Great skyline, excellent corn, but the human sacrifice really threw off the vibe. Still, you're pulled back by the real gravity of this place. It was monumental, mysterious, built by people who lived, dreamed, and planned just like us, but left almost no written word behind. Everything we know comes from the dirt, from bones, pottery, pollen samples, and the dirt has secrets. In soil layers near Monk's Mound, scientists found evidence of massive fires. Structures burned and rebuilt. Floods reshaped the land. Even droughts may have swept through. And as the climate shifted, so did Cahokia. Some suggest environmental stress might have played a role in its decline. But you're still in its golden age now, around the 11th century, and it's magnificent. You pause at the edge of a farming field. A group of teenagers is reenacting some sort of ceremonial play. One's wearing a deer mask, leaping through corn stalks. Another's pretending to strike lightning with a branch. You don't know the story, but you feel the heartbeat behind it. This was a culture that celebrated cycles of sun, moon, seasons, corn. Everything came back, except the city itself. Cahokia would eventually vanish, not in flames, not in conquest. It just faded. The population dwindled, mounds fell into silence, grass grew over stories. By the time Europeans arrived, the city was gone, reduced to hills they didn't understand. But we're not there yet. Right now, you're still wandering this living city. As dusk rolls in, fireflies dance in the shadows. Someone starts another drumbeat in the plaza. Your feet ache. Your mind hums with stories. You're surrounded by people you'll never meet, whose names are lost, but whose labor still shapes the earth under your toes. And for tonight, that's enough. The next morning arrives with the kind of quiet only a city this ancient can conjure. Not silence, but a living hush. The soft flap of cloth drying in the wind, the low murmur of water being fetched, the creak of wooden beams as doors open to meet the rising sun. You head toward the eastern edge of Cahokia, where the land slopes down toward the broad, winding fingers of the Mississippi River. The soil is rich here, black, fertile, alive with possibility. It's part of what made this place thrive. Farming wasn't just common, it was essential. You see the remains of raised beds, carefully managed irrigation ditches, and field systems that could feed tens of thousands. Here's the day's first foundational truth. The success of Cahokia wasn't built on gold or conquest. It was built on agriculture. Corn, in particular, was not just a staple, it was a power source. Corn enabled density. Density allowed hierarchy. And hierarchy meant you needed mounds, a lot of mounds. As you walk past more of them, some now overgrown with grasses, others still bare and echoing the shape of the rulers who once commanded from their tops, you start noticing something odd. Several mounds aren't aligned with each other. In fact, some are almost deliberately out of sync. Why? Well, archaeologists don't agree. Some argue they were tied to celestial alignments, not the sun, but Venus or certain star constellations. Others say they were political, that factions within Cahokia were staking symbolic territory. And then there's the fringe theory that someone just didn't like straight lines. So, yes, even 1,000 years ago, there were zoning disputes. You dip your hand into a shallow stream where pottery shards sometimes surface. One piece shows a bird like figure, a falcon perhaps. These avian motifs were central to Cahokian iconography. Birds weren't just decoration, they were messengers between realms, sky gods, thunder beings, spirits of movement. One carved figurine, found in a nearby mound, depicts a man with wings, holding a mace and a severed head, charming bedtime vibes. But it reveals something deeper, a warrior elite, a mythic archetype, thus a cautionary tale. Again, no firm answers, just questions in clay. You wander into a workshop next, where craftspeople are shaping marine shell beads. Yes, marine shells, hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. These weren't your average trinkets. They were status markers, ritual tokens, possibly even currency. And in one corner, a woman scrapes a design onto a sheet of copper. The metal gleams faintly in the filtered light. Copper wasn't easy to get, but Cahokia had it in spades, hammered, etched, traded. It added shimmer to rituals and swagger to leaders. You sit a while in the shade, chewing on roasted squash someone hands you. It's earthy, soft, a little sweet. A group of elders gathers nearby, retelling origin stories that mix floods, thunder, and animal spirits. One tale involves a turtle, a storm, and someone turning into a tree. You're not entirely sure of the plot, but the delivery is fantastic. And that's your curious detail of this stretch. Cahokia, though urban and dense, wasn't defined by walls. Unlike many cities of the ancient world, it had no great defensive perimeter. Some wooden stockades were built, especially around central mounds, but the city wasn't ringed with stone. This openness might reflect a different worldview, or maybe just an underestimation of neighbors with sharp sticks. Still, you walk the perimeter, thinking about what kind of people built all this. The labor, the organization, the shared vision. Tens of thousands hauling dirt, aligning posts with the sun, shaping a society with no wheel, no beasts of burden, no writing as we know it. And here's your debate point. Was Cahokia a state, a city-state, a theocracy, a chiefdom on steroids? Historians are still scratching their heads. The terms don't quite fit. It's like trying to label a whale using horse vocabulary. You make your way up the smaller mounds now, each offering a different view, some over the crowded neighborhoods, others toward the horizon where the river glints like a coiled ribbon. Below, people are laughing, working, praying, arguing, falling in love, growing old. You sit there as dusk falls, the warm air thick with insect hum and wood smoke. You realize something. Cahokia wasn't just a place. It was a pulse, brief in the grand sweep of time, but thunderous in its own moment. A flash of brilliance, now buried in soil and silence. But tonight, in your mind, it lives again. The next chapter of your journey begins not in the heart of Cahokia, but on its periphery, where wetlands kiss the edges of wooden homes, and morning mist floats like breath rising from the earth itself. You're outside the Grand Plaza now, in the satellite villages that orbit the city like moons around a glowing core. These outposts might seem quiet, but don't be fooled. They're the lifeblood. You pass a man collecting reeds from the marsh, bundling them neatly for roof thatching. He nods politely but says nothing, his arms covered in river silt. A little girl nearby is trying to teach a dog, or what looks like a dog, to balance a stick on its nose. She's failing spectacularly. You pause to watch anyway. This outer zone is more fluid, both geographically and socially. It's where farming thrives and boundaries blur. Many people here probably moved into the Cahokia orbit recently, drawn by trade, security, ritual, or simply curiosity. Here's a firm historical insight to kick things off. By its peak in the 1100s, Cahokia's influence spanned far beyond its mounds. Dozens, maybe hundreds of communities across the Midwest built their own smaller mounds, adopted similar iconography, and aligned their buildings to celestial bodies, evidence of a cultural web centered on Cahokia. In a way, it was the New York City of its time, but with more corn and less rent. And now, for something odd, you step over a ditch and find an ancient trash pit. It's full of broken pots, charred animal bones, and cracked shell beads. But in the corner, a single carved limestone disc. It's smooth, palm-sized, and etched with spirals. Nobody knows exactly what it means. Calendar, game piece, meditation tool, it's your weird detail of the day. And it smells like fish. Back in the core of Cahokia, things are stirring. A ceremony is about to begin. You follow the crowd toward Monk's Mound. People are gathering with bundles, not just of food, but of woven cloth, dried herbs, turtle shells, offerings. A line of people walks slowly toward the steps. Not the leaders this time, but the commoners. They leave their bundles at the base, then step back, heads bowed. You realize this isn't a sacrifice, it's an offering of gratitude. You overhear whispers about a celestial event, the rising of a bright star. Everyone's a little excited, a little on edge. Events like this aren't just astronomical, they're spiritual. They mark time, power, cycles, and in Cahokia, time isn't linear. It spirals, like that carved stone in the ditch. As you walk through the crowd, you notice subtle things. Some people wear deer-hide sandals, others go barefoot. Jewelry ranges from simple bone pins to elaborate shell necklaces. You see someone wearing a painted wooden mask, half eagle, half man. The symbolism is thick. Birds represent sky, movement, leadership. The more feathers you wear, the higher you soar, metaphorically at least. Now here comes a spicy, scholarly debate. Some researchers believe Cahokia's leadership was inherited, that power passed from parent to child. Others argue it was earned, maybe even elected, at least in certain roles. There's little consensus. The mound burials are elaborate, yes, but are they dynastic or simply reverent? In other words, was Cahokia a monarchy, a meritocracy, or just really good at organizing cool funerals? The sun dips lower. The ceremony begins. A figure stands at the summit of the mound, arms raised. You can't hear the words, but you feel the rhythm, a chant, a pattern, a beat that flows through the crowd like wind and wheat. Below the mound, people kneel, bow their heads, lift their hands. You don't know what they're asking for. Rain, perhaps? A good harvest? Peace? But in this moment, you understand that Cahokia was as much about belief as it was about brick, or rather dirt. Faith built this place, not just in gods or spirits, but in each other. The shared labor of thousands made these mounds rise. The communal effort to align buildings with solstices and stars wasn't just clever, it was sacred. You sit down at the edge of the plaza. The stars begin to emerge above you, one by one, as if pulled up by invisible strings. Someone beside you whispers the name of a constellation. It's not one you recognize, not Orion, not Ursa. It's the shape of a heron, or maybe a fish, or maybe something you just don't see yet. But they do, and they always did. Night settles in like a woven blanket, heavy and warm. You lie back on the ground just beyond the ceremonial plaza, staring up at the wide Mississippi sky. There are no streetlights, no aircraft, no city hum. Just the stars, hundreds, maybe thousands, glinting over a city that in its own way reached for the heavens long before telescopes gave them names. In the stillness, you hear it. Music. Not flutes or drums this time, but something softer. Wooden sticks clacking together in a slow rhythm, voices humming in harmony. It drifts towards you from a smaller mound nearby, where a group of people sits in a tight circle, storytelling time. You scoot closer and listen. An old man, his face painted with spirals, leans forward and tells a tale of how the world was born from a cracked turtle's shell, how people sprang from the breath of the sky, and how thunder and wind argued until one of them became the moon. You don't quite follow the logic, but somehow it still makes sense. And then he talks about the great river. The Mississippi, winding just beyond the trees, isn't just a river. It's a path between worlds. One direction takes you toward life, the other toward ancestors. It's in this moment that you realize something. Cahokia wasn't just a city, it was a cosmogram, a living, breathing diagram of the universe. Mounds, plazas, rivers, and celestial events were all linked. Every corner of the city mirrored something bigger. Sky patterns, spiritual journeys, even the passage of time itself. That's your historical truth of the night. Cahokia's layout wasn't random. It was intentional, ceremonial, cosmological. You lean back and think about how the plaza aligns with solstices, how Woodhenge likely tracked solar cycles. Buildings weren't just homes, they were instruments of time, and in that sense, living here meant living inside a calendar. You don't just check the date, you walk through it. Then someone hands you a chunk of roasted pumpkin wrapped in leaves. It's smoky, sweet, and, truth be told, better than half the microwave meals you've had this year. A baby on someone's lap gurgles. A dog sprawled nearby sighs heavily, clearly unimpressed by celestial alignment. Suddenly, the night breaks open. A meteor shoots across the sky, a silver tear in the darkness. The group gasps, but no one screams. Instead, they bow their heads in quiet respect. It's not just a rock falling through the atmosphere. It's a message, maybe a blessing, maybe a warning, maybe just a really good show. Still, in Cahokia, you don't dismiss signs. The conversation shifts. People begin whispering about the floods. Not recent ones, those are rare now, but stories of a long ago deluge that swept away villages and reshaped the land. Archaeologists today have found sediment layers in surrounding regions that suggest massive floods around 1200 CE. Were they local disasters or part of something bigger? Historians still debate whether environmental changes contributed to Cahokia's eventual decline. Was it overfarming, deforestation, drought? Some say climate stress fractured the social order. Others argue internal conflicts or political instability played a bigger role. Maybe it was all of the above. One thing's certain: the more we dig, the more complicated the story becomes. And that's your academic debate of the evening. No one agrees on how Cahokia fell. It just did. Slowly, then suddenly. You stretch your legs, rise quietly, and walk toward the edge of town. It's darker here. The sounds fade behind you, replaced by frogs croaking near a shallow marsh. The city doesn't feel like a city out here. It feels like a memory, drifting just behind your thoughts. And then you stumble across something unexpected: a line of wooden posts, weather-worn and tilting, sticking up from the earth like ribs from a buried beast. You realize it's part of a palisade, a wall, not to keep enemies out, but perhaps to mark a sacred boundary. The wall's construction is crude but massive. It zigzags through the terrain, enclosing the ceremonial core. Some believe it was built quickly, even hastily, maybe as a reaction. To what, though? Fear? Unrest? You follow it in silence. The moon casts long shadows. Somewhere, an owl hoots. And then, out of nowhere, you step into an old fire pit. Not hot, of course, but the earth is darker, smoother, worn down by time and use. Burnt pottery lies shattered beneath your feet. It's a cooking site, or maybe a place where stories were told, or secrets were shared. You sit there, running your fingers through the soil, feeling the texture of the past. Cahokia isn't a ruin. It's a palimpsest, a city written over and over again, in footsteps and ashes and stars. And tonight, you've walked right into the middle of its last great breath. The air is thicker tonight. It clings to your skin like wet cotton, heavy with the scent of mud, sweat, and something sweet, fermenting berries perhaps. You're deeper into the living body of Cahokia now, not just observing but absorbing it, like mist through cloth. And as you round a bend in the winding dirt path, you see it. A funeral procession, but not somber, not weeping. It's rhythmic, beautiful. A line of people, dozens of them, move in slow, measured steps toward a conical mound bearing bundles wrapped in woven fiber. A low chant pulses through the crowd, steady as a heartbeat. The bundle in the front, though you can't see inside, is clearly a body, covered in bark cloth and decorated with feathers, copper rings, and dried flowers. They're burying someone important, and this is your historical anchor for tonight. Cahokia's burial mounds weren't just graves. They were theaters of memory, stages for political power, and vessels of cultural continuity. A person's death here was an opportunity to reaffirm the cosmic order. You don't bury a body, you bury a symbol. And when that symbol carries status, everyone watches. You kneel beside a thicket of tall grass, unnoticed. The procession reaches the mound. The crowd gathers. Someone, maybe a priest or shaman raises a carved staff and begins a eulogy in a rhythmic, sing-song voice. You can't understand the words, but the cadence pulls you in. And then silence, a final breath from the crowd, and then the burial. You feel the gravity of it, not just emotionally, but literally, as if the earth here is denser, full of memory, full of pressure. Afterwards, the people slowly disperse. Some leave offerings at the base of the mound. Others sit quietly in the grass, heads bowed. A few laugh softly. In Cahokia, death doesn't erase, death transitions. You walk away, heart heavy but curious, and then you find something truly strange. It's a circle of posts, wooden pillars set in perfect intervals, forming a ring about 400 feet across. You're standing in one of the wood henges. The sun is long gone, but if you were here at sunrise, you'd see something magical. On the solstice, the sun aligns with one of the main posts, casting shadows exactly where they need to fall. This wasn't an accident. It's your strange detail of the night. These massive wooden calendars show an advanced understanding of astronomy, built without metal tools or complex math. The fact that they still work, over 800 years later, is kind of terrifying. It's also comforting. It means Cahokia's people weren't just practical builders. They were philosophers of light. They mapped the sky to shape their world. Now you're back in the main plaza again, this time during what appears to be a feast. The air sizzles with roasted game. Laughter bubbles up from a cluster of teenagers playing a guessing game with stones. Old women swap gossip and corn cakes. A group of men performs a mimic dance, copying birds, bears, even exaggerated humans with belly laugh timing. It's joyful, and you realize something important. We often imagine ancient civilizations as stiff, ceremonial, distant, but Cahokia was loud, smelly, busy, alive. It wasn't all solemn chants and sky worship. It was spilled soup, scraped knees, bad jokes, and noisy toddlers. It was human. A woman with braided hair offers you a handful of river nuts. You take them. They're bitter and smoky. She smiles and walks off before you can say thank you. The nuts crunch between your teeth, earthy and grounding. Here's where the scholarly debate slides in. Some researchers argue Cahokia collapsed because of resource strain. Others think internal political shifts broke down the complex system of elite control. And then there's the idea that it was migration, that people simply moved away, not because of collapse, but because of opportunity. Which is it? We don't know, and that's okay. Because for now, you're here, wandering the spaces between evidence and imagination, between ruins and rhythm. You've watched a city rise, dance, chant, and mourn, and it's not finished yet. One final sight greets you before you turn in. A child on top of a mound, arms stretched wide, silhouetted against the moon. He's mimicking a bird, not for anyone, not for ceremony, just for himself. He flaps once, twice, then jumps down the slope and runs away, laughing. And for just a moment, Cahokia feels eternal. Dawn rolls in like a whisper. The sky shifts from charcoal to lavender, and the mists that cling to Cahokia's mounds drift upward like the last dreams of a sleeping city. You find yourself perched halfway up Monk's Mound, your legs dangling over a stone lip that was probably never meant to be sat on, but here you are. Below, the city stretches wide. Even in its quietest hour, Cahokia pulses with breath. You can see smoke beginning to curl from hearths. Traders, those tireless wanderers, are already moving between tents, and a group of children is racing barefoot through the dew-drenched grass, their shrieks of joy echoing into the air. It's in this stillness that you feel the weight of time most acutely. Monk's Mound, this colossal feat of human effort, wasn't made in a week or a year. It took generations. People who never lived to see its peak carried the dirt that lifted their descendants into the sky. You think about that, and how strange it is to build something knowing you'll never see it finished. That's more than labor, that's belief, and that's your first truth of this final act. The sheer persistence of Cahokia's builders was staggering. No wheels, no metal tools, just thousands of hands, baskets of dirt, and time. It's the slowest form of shouting into eternity. You begin your descent down the mound's eastern face, careful with each step. The morning is warming now, and the air is full of birdsong and the rustling of leaves. You pass a family harvesting squash from a communal field. A baby strapped to a woman's back watches you with serious eyes, chewing on a fistful of blanket. You smile. He doesn't. You keep walking. In the distance, a new construction project is underway. Wooden posts are being driven into the ground, forming what looks like another large enclosure. You pause, trying to make sense of the design. A younger man nearby shrugs and says something you don't understand, then gestures toward the sun. You think he's trying to explain that the enclosure will align with a coming eclipse. Cahokia didn't stop building. It adapted, expanded, or reached. But even here, in its late phase, you sense the cracks forming. People whisper more, arguments linger longer. The crowd at ceremonies is smaller than before. You see more fences, more delineations. It feels less like one people and more like many groups, trying to remember why they came together in the first place. And then you stumble upon something heartbreaking. It's a house, partially burned, abandoned. Inside, the ashes are cold, but recent. A broken pot lies on the floor. Charred footprints scatter across the entryway. Someone left in a hurry. You don't know what happened, and neither do the few villagers who glance at it nervously. You ask around. Some shake their heads. Others mutter about tension between clans. Maybe it was a feud. Maybe it was punishment. Or maybe the gods were displeased. But here's the historical ambiguity. Late in Cahokia's timeline, there's evidence of social upheaval. Fortified walls, shifting settlement patterns, more burials with signs of trauma. Was this civil conflict? Was it an invasion? Historians remain divided. You pause again in the plaza later that day. A public announcement is being made. You can't understand the words, but the tone is somber. A chief or priest holds up a carved baton, then points toward the northern mounds. People murmur. A woman next to you frowns and pulls her children close. Something's changing. Still, daily life continues. Fishermen mend nets. Children grind maize. Lovers sneak glances across the courtyard. A boy pretends to be a panther, crawling through tall grass to ambush his sister. She sees him, screams, and bolts in the opposite direction. He howls with laughter. And there, in the ordinariness, is the beauty of it all. Cahokia wasn't just monumental mounds and cosmic calendars. It was also kids playing tag, neighbors borrowing firewood, and someone waking up at dawn to stir a pot of beans. Your academic tension here is subtle but powerful. Was Cahokia's collapse an implosion or an evolution? Did it fracture under its own weight, or did it simply change into something else, less visible, less centralized, but still culturally alive? The sun begins to lower again. You climb another mound, not monks this time, one of the smaller ones, quieter, overgrown. From here, the city is silhouetted in amber light. For a moment, you see it not as it is, or was, but as it feels, timeless. Someone once called this America's forgotten city. But not tonight. Tonight, you remember. You're walking again, this time along a ridge path that curves around the city's edge, where forest and field brush shoulders, and the wind carries whispers from both. Each step you take lands softly on centuries of footsteps beneath. It's quiet here, not empty, just hushed, like Cahokia itself is waiting. Below, the mounds seem smaller now, not because they are, but because your perspective has shifted. You've seen the city from its crown. You've walked its pulse. Now, you're watching it breathe its last golden light of evening. You find a small grove and duck beneath the trees. A boy and his grandfather are there, carving into a slab of soft wood. The boy hums as he works, his blade small, his cuts slow. The older man nods, offering a quiet word now and then. They're making something together, an animal maybe, or a god, or both. And just like that, the ordinary moment becomes sacred. Because this, right here, might be Cahokia's legacy. Not just the structures, not just the alignments, but the transmission of memory, of gesture, of meaning from one hand to the next. You pause nearby and watch, unseen. The carving takes form, a figure with wide eyes and a long snout, maybe a spirit, maybe just a funny story the boy likes. You'll never know. You're only visiting. Now here comes one of the strangest facts buried in Cahokia's story, literally. A few years ago, archaeologists discovered evidence of massive pits near some of the main mounds, but not for trash, for redistribution. These were likely storage pits, huge ones, used to hold grain, dried food, maybe trade goods. It points to central control over resources. You might think of it as a prehistoric warehouse system. But what happens when someone hoards the grain? When distribution falters? Some suggest this centralization was Cahokia's strength until it wasn't. The system that allowed rapid growth may have also created fragility. One bad season, one corrupt leader, one burned field, and suddenly the gears stop turning. You leave the grove and cross a dry stream bed where fish bones glint in the dust. Then ahead, a large wooden frame catches your eye. It's being dismantled. A dozen men are taking apart what looks like a ceremonial structure, pole by pole, plank by plank, not recklessly, gently, carefully, like they mean to build it again somewhere else. You ask a bystander what's happening. She shrugs. The rains have changed, she says. It's a small sentence, but it echoes through you, because climate records confirm that around 1200 CE, rainfall patterns shifted, summers became erratic, crops failed, the river flooded more, then less. And what's a city of tens of thousands to do when its corn stops growing? You can almost hear the council debates. Move north, spread out, tighten control, or perhaps loosen it. Some communities began moving outward. The archaeological record shows new settlements sprouting in the outer river valleys, less dense, less monumental, but still connected, like embers from a great fire drifting outward. This is your open academic question of the night. Did Cahokia collapse, or did it simply diffuse? A few scholars now argue that Cahokia didn't vanish. It evolved. Its people didn't disappear. They became the ancestors of later Mississippian cultures, whose town plazas, mound traditions, and iconography echo Cahokia like ripples on a pond. You sit by a pond now, small, still, ringed with reeds. Dragonflies skim its surface like dancers. The moon has risen, casting the water in silver. And in this moment, it's hard to believe this city ever ended, because it doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like dusk. A pause, a deep breath before the next chapter. A boy runs past you, laughing, carrying a bundle of herbs. Somewhere nearby, someone begins a song, low and slow, like a lullaby meant for the soil itself. And in the wind, you swear you hear the voices of 1,000 builders, chanting their hope into mounds of earth. Cahokia still lives, in dirt, in stars, in memory, and for one more night, in you. The final path winds uphill, not steeply, but with purpose. You're heading toward the western edge of Cahokia, where the land begins to roll and the forest creeps closer. Here the city thins, fewer homes, fewer mounds. The beating heart of the metropolis is behind you now, and what remains is the breath, soft, slow, barely audible. You pass an orchard of fruit trees, likely planted generations ago. Some bear fruit, some are bare. A woman tends them quietly, muttering a chant or a prayer as she touches each trunk. She doesn't look at you, but you feel acknowledged all the same. And here, finally, you reach what might be the edge of Cahokia. Not a wall, but a boundary marked by a simple raised platform and a circle of stones. It doesn't feel defensive. It feels symbolic. Maybe this was a place of departure. Maybe this was where travelers were blessed before setting out. Maybe this is where the people of Cahokia said goodbye, not just to one another, but to their city, their way of life. This is your final truth. No matter how grand a city becomes, it must one day be let go, not necessarily abandoned, but transformed from city to memory, from memory to soil, from soil to story. You look out beyond the boundary. Fields stretch into horizon. Forests hum with life. The Mississippi glints in the moonlight far below, still flowing as it always has. You sit, and in that stillness, you realize that Cahokia wasn't defined by its rise or its fall, but by its existence. A place built not for kings, but for people, for gathering, for stargazing, for living together, and sometimes for letting go together. That, perhaps, is Cahokia's greatest legacy, the art of holding on and the grace of release. The stars overhead are no different from those that shone 1,000 years ago. And maybe, just maybe, someone like you sat in this very spot, watching them, wondering what would become of it all. You smile. You don't need the answer. You just need the silence. Relaxation segment, 300 words. Now take a deep breath. Let the hum of the night settle into your shoulders. Let the thoughts of ancient plazas, rising mounds, and sun-drenched fields drift softly to the back of your mind. Picture the slow, rhythmic chant of the Woodhenge Circle, the whisper of wind over river grass, the muffled laughter of children echoing through a city now held gently in the earth's memory. Imagine your body resting at the foot of Monk's Mound, the soft loam under your back, warm from the day's sun. Overhead, stars wheel quietly through the sky, the same constellations, the same dance, unchanged for 1,000 years. The air is cool now. The crickets have taken up their lullaby. Even the ghosts of footsteps seem to tiptoe, careful not to disturb the peace. Let your breath slow. Let your eyelids soften. Whatever you carried with you today, the noise, the weight, the questions, let it go now, like feathers tossed into the river. Because in this moment, in this quiet memory of Cahokia, you are safe. You are part of something vast, something ancient, something still whispering to the stars. So let the silence wrap around you. Let it cradle you like the earth cradles old cities. Let it rock you gently. You've wandered far tonight. Now rest, sleep, dream. Hey folks, tonight we're slipping quietly into the soft, flickering world of paper lanterns, rustling silk, and the hushed clink of porcelain teacups. Tonight, we wander into the serene world of samurai warriors, not as they charge onto battlefields, but as they kneel in quiet rooms, perfecting the art of stillness through the meticulous rituals of the tea ceremony. Now, before you say, I'd totally crush this ancient warrior lifestyle, remember, if your socks aren't lined up precisely with the edge of the tatami mat, you've already failed. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, drop a comment below with your location and what time it is for you right now. Now turn off the lights, switch on a little white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey. You step barefoot across the rice straw tatami floor, each fiber brushing softly against your heels. The air smells faintly of cedar and smoke. In your right hand, you carry a blade, but in your left, a fan, because being a samurai isn't just about combat. It's about composure, about ritual, about being still when the world demands speed. The room you enter is barely furnished, just a hanging scroll, a flower in a small vase, and a low square hearth sunk into the floor. In this peaceful space, war is set aside. Here, you prepare to learn chanoyu, the way of tea. It is the early 17th century. You live in the Tokugawa era, a time when Japan has closed its borders to the world. For many samurai, battle has become rare, so instead of fighting, you perfect form. You learn poetry. You trace kanji with brush and ink. And above all, you kneel and you pour tea. You lower yourself slowly into the seiza position, knees folded, spine straight, and your master, sitting across from you, begins. He wipes the bowl with an embroidered silk cloth, rinses the whisk with hot water, and turns each item 3 times clockwise before laying it down. No gesture is wasted, no motion rushed. Even the sound of the bamboo ladle dipping into the kettle is intentional. Your legs already ache. The tea itself, powdered matcha, vivid green, bitter as an unsweetened thought. But that isn't the point. The flavor matters less than the mindset. You're here to cultivate wabi sabi, an appreciation for imperfection, transience, and quiet restraint. Here's a delightful historical truth to steep on. Samurai were not just permitted, but expected to study tea ceremony. In fact, many viewed it as a form of battlefield training. If you can remain still for 2 hours while your foot falls asleep under layers of armor, you can certainly remain calm as arrows fly. One odd little fact for you: the tea scoop, or chashaku, used in these ceremonies was often named, yes, named by its owner. Not joking. A samurai might call his scoop Whispers in Bamboo or Autumn's Last Breath. Historians still puzzle over this poetic personalization. Was it pure tradition or subtle flexing among tea elites? And here comes our first academic riddle of the evening. Did the tea ceremony really influence battlefield discipline, or was it just a way to show off one's aesthetic refinement in a more peaceful era? Some scholars argue it instilled patience and mindfulness. Others suggest it was more about social prestige. The debate, like the tea, simmers quietly. As you rise stiffly from the mat, your knees cracking like distant musket fire, you're already beginning to understand. Wielding a sword is easy. Wielding silence, that takes training. The next morning, your training continues, not with swords, but with sleeves. You wake before sunrise, your room still cloaked in navy shadows. Outside, a bamboo fountain tilts, spills, and knocks gently against stone. Karakara, the sound punctuates the hush, a rhythmic metronome in this meditative life. You fold your bedding precisely, corners aligned like military orders written in fabric. Then you wash your face in cold water, dry it with a square cloth folded twice, because a samurai's dignity begins before breakfast. Today's lesson isn't in combat or poetry. It's how to serve tea to a guest. You might scoff, how hard can it be to hand someone a cup? But your master corrects you with a look so calm, it burns. You learn that handing over a tea bowl is an art form. You must bow, rotate the bowl with both hands so the most beautiful side faces your guest, and pause long enough for the weight of gesture to settle like dust on the rim. Even where your thumb rests matters. Too far forward, disrespect. Too high, arrogance. Too loose, you may as well be slinging it like sakis at a festival. The tea room itself, you come to realize, is not just a setting, but a state of mind. Called the chashitsu, it's usually no larger than 6 tatami mats, and intentionally humble, clay walls, wooden beams, and paper windows that let in soft light and nothing more. But here's the kicker. You must crawl to enter. There's a tiny doorway, just 3 feet high, forcing every guest, no matter how grand, to bow in humility before stepping inside. That's right. Even the fiercest daimyo must drop to his knees like a schoolboy before tea. Fun fact, this design wasn't just for symbolism. Some historians believe it served a sneaky security purpose too. No one could burst in wielding a sword if they had to crawl like a turtle. Whether it was a gesture of peace or just clever architecture, the tiny entrance still sparks debate among scholars. And speaking of debates, one of the more curious questions among tea historians, yes, that's a real field, is why tea masters insisted on such controlled environments. Was it spiritual purification? A way to counterbalance the chaos of samurai life? Or maybe, just maybe, it was a brilliant manipulation of social dynamics. In a room where everyone must kneel and whisper, the loudest man becomes the most out of place. But don't get too relaxed. Your tea guest has arrived. You greet them with a bow deep enough to show you don't think you're special, not even a little. You serve the tea slowly, hands steady, eyes down, no chatting, no smiling, just the sound of boiling water, the whistle of steam, the click of ceramic on wood. And as your guest lifts the bowl, they too bow. They rotate it. They admire the glaze, as if it's a national treasure. Then they sip. All of this, you understand, is not performance. It is a declaration. It says, I honor you with my stillness. It says, we may one day fight, but today we kneel in peace. It says, I am not just a blade, I am a vessel. And when it's all done, after the last drop has been drunk, after every item has been cleaned and placed exactly where it began, you hear something unexpected. Silence. Not emptiness, but presence, like the quiet after snow. You breathe. The tea room breathes back. It's a little spooky how much that silence says, right? And yet, you're beginning to get it. The world of the samurai wasn't always drawn with blood and steel. Sometimes it was sketched in steam and ink and the clink of a cup returning home. You're sent out that afternoon on an errand, one that's supposedly simple. Deliver a pouch of rare tea leaves to the local Chajin, a tea master who lives near the temple. A soft job, right? Just a walk through the village, bow politely, drop the parcel, and head back before sunset. But nothing in samurai life is ever quite that simple. The moment you leave the compound, the world expands, and with it, your sense of awkwardness. The sandals chafe your heels, and you swear one of your socks is just slightly crooked. You feel exposed without your katana, but the tea master insisted, no weapons allowed, just silk, just sandals, just serenity. The path takes you through the edge of a plum orchard, the scent sweet and almost sickly in the summer heat. The chirp of cicadas is relentless. A dragonfly hovers at eye level, just long enough to judge your posture. When you arrive at the tea master's house, you're greeted not by a servant, but by a boy no older than 12. His eyes squint in the sun, and he says nothing, just beckons with 2 fingers and disappears through the gate. You follow, stepping cautiously. The garden is a living painting, rocks arranged like thoughts, moss blooming in patches, water trickling in a way that seems rehearsed. And there, at the center, sits the Chajin. He doesn't rise to greet you. Instead, he waves his hand toward a bamboo mat and says, "Sit. Tell me why your master sent you." The question is a trap, of course. You kneel, spine straight. You answer that you are a humble student, still learning, unworthy of the gift you carry. You place the pouch before him with both hands. He doesn't touch it. He watches you instead, so finally he speaks. "Then show me. Make tea." Your stomach flips like a startled koi. No tools, no warning, no help, just your memory and your trembling hands. You begin, bow, unfold the cloth, clean the bowl. Your fingers shake, but your breath steadies them. You pour the water, whisk the powder, turn the bowl just so, and when you present it, he says nothing. He drinks, then again. So you do. 3 times, 4. each time he corrects one thing, not with words, just with a glance, a breath, a silence that stretches. And here's the weird part. The more he corrects you, the calmer you feel. Like each mistake is a thread pulled loose, letting your nerves unravel into stillness. It turns out that this man once served under Oda Nobunaga, a name you've only heard whispered. He fought in battles, he lost friends, but now he pours tea every day. And his students, some of them are future generals, some are poets, some are widows, all are warriors in their own way. One strange note he shares before you leave. Some samurai, he says, refused to duel unless they first shared tea with their opponent, just one cup, to remind themselves that they both carried souls. You're not sure whether to believe him, but something about the way he says it makes your doubts hush. And scholars today still argue whether such stories were symbolic or actual practice. Did samurai really drink tea before drawing swords, or is it romanticized nonsense from Edo-era playwrights? The evidence is thin, but the idea? It's sticky and beautiful, and maybe that's what matters. As you walk home in the golden dusk, the pouch of tea leaves now empty. Your feet ache and your sleeves are smudged, but your spine straight, your breath still. The tea has changed you, and not because of the taste. Later that week, you're invited to your first formal tea gathering, a chaji, hosted by a senior retainer in your lord's household. You are to attend not as a servant, but as a guest, an honor, and a test. You spend the entire morning preparing. You iron your hakama so precisely, it looks like it's been folded by geometry itself. Your tea pouch has been cleaned twice. You shave with a dull blade that tugs more than it cuts. One strand of hair out of place, and someone will notice. This is not a party. This is a performance of the soul. The chaji begins at twilight. You arrive at a modest tea hut nestled behind a stone wall. A hanging scroll greets you with 3 characters, Ichigo Ichie, one time, one meeting. A reminder, this moment will never repeat. No gathering is ever the same. No sip of tea is ever twice identical. You crawl through the small door into the tea room and join 4 other guests. Each bows, not to show deference, but to declare presence. No one speaks beyond a whisper. A single flower in a vase leans slightly to the left. You pretend it means something. Then the host enters. He moves like a shadow given purpose. He sets the utensils one by one, the kettle, the ladle, the whisk, the caddy. The natsume, a small, lacquered container for the matcha, glistens like it knows secrets. He bows. He begins. The water boils. The steam rises. The first bowl is for the guest of honor, a scholar with ink-stained fingers. Then another, and another. Finally, it is your turn. The bowl is set before you, beautiful in its imperfection. One edge is chipped, the glaze uneven, but the balance of it in your hand is like holding a breath. You turn the bowl, you bow, you drink, and for a moment it feels like the world tilts into alignment. You hand the bowl back, the host bows, the cycle continues. There's food, modest, seasonal, slices of pickled daikon, grilled fish, a soup so clear it could be a reflection. And here's a strange fact you overhear in soft conversation. In some schools of tea, the host would intentionally scuff or dull the tea utensils before the gathering to prevent guests from being too dazzled by perfection. Imagine planning a party and denting your silverware on purpose. This practice reflects a philosophy called wabi cha, championed by the great tea master Sen no Rikyu. He believed that true beauty lies not in luxury, but in quiet imperfection, a philosophy that still divides modern scholars. Some argue Rikyu was a radical minimalist. Others say he manipulated aesthetics to challenge the flashy tastes of the elite. Was he humble, or was he cunning? The ceremony ends in darkness. Candles flicker. The scent of burnt charcoal lingers. The host bows one final time, and without a word, each guest files out one by one through the tiny door and back into the ordinary world. You step outside, and you're not the same. Not because of what was said, there were barely 10 sentences all night, but because of what was shared in silence, in the space between gesture and breath, in the bitter, quiet gift of a single bowl of tea. As you walk home, beneath the soundless stars, you realize something strange. You've never felt more still. You wake before dawn again, not because you're told to, but because the stillness of early morning has become a craving. The world is quieter before it remembers itself. Even the birds wait. You kneel in your room, facing a paper window tinged with faint blue. The tatami creaks softly as you shift your weight. There's no tea gathering today, no official lesson, but your fingers reach for the tea whisk anyway. Your muscles now remember what your mind once strained to hold. This morning, you've been asked to visit a shrine at the outskirts of the province, not as a warrior, but as a representative of your master's household. You'll accompany an aging monk, a man so silent he seems to communicate in the tilt of his eyebrows. The shrine is dedicated to Canon, the bodhisattva of compassion. You've passed it 100 times, but never entered. It rests at the foot of a wooded hill, framed by towering cypress trees and the eternal hush of moss. As you step through the Torai gate, the air shifts. It smells of old wood, damp stone, and something sweet, incense perhaps, or blooming plum. The monk leads you through a winding path lined with carved stones, each one etched with poetry too worn to read. He stops without warning, gestures to a clearing with a moss-covered bench, and sits. He pulls from his sleeve a tea bowl. You blink. You think, here, in the woods, without tatami, without silence? But he sets a kettle over a small iron brazier he'd hidden in his robes, because apparently monks are magicians, and begins preparing tea as casually as someone tying their shoes. The ceremony unfolds like a stream, nothing staged, nothing forced. You watch him move and realize the essence of tea isn't in the location, it's in the attention. That's your first major truth tonight. The tea ceremony was never confined to tea rooms or estates. Traveling monks and wandering samurai often conducted open-air tea gatherings, sometimes using just 3 items: a bowl, a whisk, and a water source. No scrolls, no tatami, no bowing audience. And here's a bizarre twist. There are records of tea being served during battle encampments. Imagine the scene: blood in the distance, soldiers in armor, and in the center, 2 men kneeling in the dirt, passing a cup. Scholars debate whether this was an act of calm in chaos or a political flex, a way to show superiority through unshakable composure. Was it peace amidst war, or pride disguised as stillness? The arguments swirl like steam. The monk finishes his tea, hands you the bowl. No words, just a nod. You drink, and you begin to suspect this isn't a break in your training. This is the training. On the way back, you pass through a rural village. Children run barefoot along the irrigation paths. An old woman tends to a garden of mountain herbs. A black and white cat watches from a roof, blinking slowly, like it's judging your posture. You pause at a roadside inn. The innkeeper recognizes your crest and rushes to offer hospitality. Not food, not coin, but tea. She brings it in a chipped ceramic cup. No rotation, no whisk, no ritual, just warmth. And somehow, it's perfect. You thank her, and she bows. Her hands are worn from work, her kimono frayed at the sleeves, but her tea is as steady as the monk's. And that's when it hits you. Tea was never about status, not truly. It was meant to erase it. That was the vision of Murata Juko, the 15th century tea master who first proposed that all people, regardless of rank, could share tea as equals. A bold idea at the time, and one that earned him both reverence and ridicule. To this day, historians argue whether Juko was genuinely egalitarian or simply expanding his clientele, but the result was clear. A samurai and a peasant could, in theory, kneel on the same floor, drink from the same bowl, and be the same for a moment. You continue your walk, bowl in hand, steam curling like a question mark in the breeze. And that question follows you. Can silence ever truly be shared equally? You return to the estate just as the rain begins, soft, misting rain that turns the stone paths dark and glossy. A servant hurries to take your soaked outer robe, but you shake your head. The dampness feels grounding. Your master summons you, not to punish your delay, but to share a story. He leads you to a narrow veranda overlooking the garden, now blurred by rain. Beneath the shelter of the eaves, he kneels, gestures for you to sit, and pours 2 bowls of tea without ceremony. He tells you of a samurai he once knew, a man so feared in battle that enemies would sometimes retreat at the sight of him. But that man's greatest skill, your master says, wasn't his sword, it was his pause. He never rushed a duel, he never struck first. He would stand calmly, study his opponent, even breathe in rhythm with the breeze, and then move. He learned this, your master says, through tea, that moment before pouring, that stillness before lifting the bowl, that breath before whisking. It taught him restraint, control, and the value of hesitation, something no battlefield ever allows. You sip the tea, it's warm, slightly earthy, slightly bitter, like truth. And here comes another curious fact. Some samurai families practiced tea before combat as a genuine pre-battle ritual. It wasn't about caffeine or superstition. It was about ritualizing composure, about walking into chaos with a heart that had just been calmed by steam and silence. Of course, modern scholars argue over this. Was it widespread or just a poetic footnote? Some documents suggest formal tea gatherings were held even in castle war rooms. Others say it's likely exaggerated, but the image is powerful, armor clinking, thunder outside, and in the center, a quiet bowl passed hand to hand. The following week, something shifts. You're asked to assist with a tea gathering for a visiting lord, not as a guest, not as a student, as the host. You panic, of course. You've only watched, you've only practiced in private, but now you must perform publicly. Every movement will be studied, every breath counted. The bowl must be placed precisely. The steam must rise at the right moment. You spend 2 days rehearsing the placement of the scroll, the single flower, the angle of the kettle. You adjust the lighting so the room feels neither bright nor shadowed. You even retie your sash 6 times to ensure it lies flat across your waist. And when the day comes, you kneel behind the hearth and begin. The guests enter, bowing one by one. Your master sits at the end of the row, silent, eyes closed. You wipe the bowl. You warm the whisk. You measure the tea, not by volume, but by instinct. The ladle dips. The water flows. The whisk moves in small, precise circles, frothing, not churning. And the bowl is passed. Not once do you look up. Not once do you tremble. The guest of honor drinks, bows, compliments the balance. And you realize your hands are no longer your own. They belong to centuries, to tradition, to something older than language. A strange, delightful detail. During the height of the Edo period, the most prestigious tea masters were sometimes more influential than military officers. They chose who sat beside the shogun. They decided the seasonal themes of imperial ceremonies. They even resolved feuds through shared cups rather than drawn swords. This blending of art and politics still perplexes scholars. Was the tea ceremony a form of diplomacy or manipulation cloaked in hospitality? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. Like the taste of matcha, it's bitter and sweet, and arguing about it misses the point. As your guests leave, you sit in the now empty room, the scent of charcoal still hovering in the air. The bowl rests beside you, stained green at the bottom. You don't feel proud, you feel still, and that's something no sword could teach you. The next day, you're awakened by a messenger. He brings a letter, folded in layers of mulberry paper, sealed with wax in the shape of a chrysanthemum. The emblem belongs to the imperial household, and suddenly your sleepy brain feels very, very awake. You are to travel to Kyoto. The court, it seems, is preparing a ceremonial tea gathering to honor a visiting delegate from the Ryukyu Kingdom. Your master has been asked to oversee the event, and you are to assist. You pack in silence. Not weapons, not armor. Just your robes, your tools, your training, and a single cloth bundle that contains your personal tea bowl. It's not ornate. In fact, it's slightly lopsided, the glaze pooled unevenly near the base. You chose it for that reason. Wabi-sabi, imperfection as beauty. Kyoto is a city of whispers. Temples rise like stone thoughts above narrow lanes. Monks in saffron robes pass geishas in lacquered geta. Smoke drifts from shrines. Lanterns flutter in the breeze. You're taken to a quiet compound on the outskirts of the imperial complex. Everything is hushed. Even the birds seem to tread softly. The room is being prepared already. Walls scrubbed, scroll chosen, incense tested. And in the center, a kettle is warming, its lid twitching gently as if it too is nervous. You are not in charge. but your every action matters. You sweep the garden path of stray petals, you align cushions, you adjust the angle of a branch in the flower arrangement because one leaf is pointing too aggressively at the alcove. And then the delegate arrives. He's younger than expected, wears ocean-colored robes, and carries a folding fan with coral inlay. He bows so deeply, it's like the earth is pulling him down. The ceremony begins, and this time, your master prepares the tea. You kneel at the side, ready to assist, but he says nothing, just glances. And somehow, that's enough. You pass him the bowl, refill the water, offer the cloth. Each motion becomes part of a language only the two of you understand. You remember a story he once told you of a 16th century tea master named Furuta Oribe, a brilliant man who redefined tea aesthetics, but eventually fell from favor and was ordered to commit seppuku by the shogun. His crime? No one agrees. Some say it was political betrayal. Others whisper he simply brewed tea the wrong way, challenged the wrong flavor. Was it art or arrogance? The debate continues to this day. The guest drinks. The room holds its breath. And then he smiles, not broadly, just enough for one corner of his mouth to acknowledge the effort. The ceremony continues. No speeches, no declarations, just steam and gestures and soft-throated gratitude. Afterward, you return to the garden. You're given a cup of leftover matcha, the same blend served to royalty, but now cooling slightly in your hand. It tastes no different than usual, which is oddly comforting. Here's your strange detail for the evening. The wooden ladle used in many tea ceremonies is traditionally made from a single piece of bamboo cut in winter. Why? Because the bamboo harvested in winter is denser, less likely to crack, and supposedly more harmonious with hot water. But it also makes the ladle sound subtly different when tapping the kettle, more of a click than a clunk. Tea is full of such tiny obsessions. Scholars argue over whether these details were truly spiritual or just cultural micromanagement. Is devotion to nuance a path to enlightenment or just elite fussiness? No one agrees. But you're starting to care less about the answers because the questions are starting to feel like their own kind of stillness. You watch a maple leaf fall sideways into the koi pond. You sip your tea, and for a moment, it's enough. The days in Kyoto stretch like golden thread, slow, delicate, and rich with repetition. Every morning, the kettle steams. Every evening, you sweep the path where no one has walked. You begin to understand that ritual isn't about novelty. It's about depth. 1,000 bows later, you're still discovering new meaning in each incline of your spine. Then comes the surprise. A letter from your Lord's scribe arrives, not sealed this time, but marked with urgency. Your master is summoned back to your province on matters of estate governance, and you are to remain in Kyoto for one season as a tea envoy. You almost drop the letter. You, alone, representing the household in the imperial city. You can't argue. You just bow and accept. That afternoon, you meet with a court official who informs you of your first assignment. Assist in hosting a tea gathering for a visiting Zen abbot from Mount Hiei. The guest list includes poets, scholars, and, unexpectedly, a young woman renowned for her brushwork in calligraphy. Not a noble, not a warrior, just exceptional. You don't question it, because this is Kyoto. Tea here bends for no social boundary. You spend 2 days preparing, not just the tea and tools, but the space. You choose a scroll with a single character, mu, emptiness. You select a wildflower for the alcove, one that leans imperfectly but holds its own. On the evening of the gathering, rain falls again, heavier this time, like the sky is weeping into the rooftops. The guests arrive cloaked and damp, their sandals left at the edge of the wooden corridor. You bow, you breathe, you begin. And the abbot? He watches with eyes like still water, says nothing, just drinks, just breathes. But the calligrapher, she sees, not with words, but with her expression. When you present the bowl, she tilts her head ever so slightly, as if recognizing your exact effort, not as flawless, but as true. Later, as the guests disperse, she lingers, steps to the alcove, draws her finger lightly through the air beside the scroll, and whispers, "You chose emptiness. But there's something here." Then she bows and leaves. Here's your final strange truth of the night. In some schools of tea, the host is not allowed to speak unless addressed, sometimes for the entire 2-hour gathering. The host must read every signal through posture, glance, and breath. Historians argue, is this self-effacing humility or quiet control? Does silence give space, or does it establish dominance in disguise? The truth may lie somewhere in between, or nowhere at all. But what you know deeply now is that silence can speak more than words ever could. That night, you wander the city alone. You pass a temple gate, a noodle stall, a drunk samurai mumbling poetry into the street lamp. The rain has stopped, but the air still holds its echo. You return to your room, light a single candle, and prepare tea for yourself. No guests, no bowing, no performance. Just you, the bowl, the whisk, and the sound of bamboo tapping porcelain in a city that will never notice. And that's fine, because this ritual, this stillness, you now carry it within. When you're ready, we'll begin. Act 3, the final chapter in this quiet journey. You return home in autumn. The road back from Kyoto winds through mountains dappled in red and gold. The leaves fall in lazy spirals, catching in your sleeves and hair. You don't brush them off. They belong somehow. When you arrive at the estate, it's like stepping into a dream you once had and forgot. The gate is lower than you remember, the pine trees taller, the tatami creaks in all the same places. Your master greets you in the garden with a nod. No words, just a teacup in his hand. You kneel beside him. The silence is not awkward. It's aged, software. And then he speaks. You changed. Not a question, a confirmation. You nod. The following week, you are asked to host a tea gathering of your own. Your first, fully independent. Not for nobles, not for envoys, just for your fellow retainers. Young warriors still sharpening their swords more than their minds. Men who fidget during silence and mistake slowness for weakness. You spend hours preparing, not to impress, but to invite. The room you choose is small and half forgotten. Dust clings to the paper windows. You sweep, you scrub, you open the shutters just enough to let in a slant of late afternoon sun. The scroll that you hang bears no writing, just a single brushstroke, a circle, imperfect and broken. And so, the Zen symbol for the moment when the mind is free to let the body create. You brew the tea slowly, aware of every heartbeat. And your guests? At first, they shift and murmur. One tries to stifle a laugh when his leg falls asleep. Another drops his ladle. But by the second bowl, they begin to listen to the water, to the whisk, to each other. By the third bowl, no one speaks. You serve, they bow, and the silence grows bold. A curious truth from this era: there were tea gatherings designed specifically for warriors before long journeys, not just to calm nerves, but to set intentions, and to remind each samurai that he carried not only a blade, but also a presence, a responsibility to move through the world with care. One strange example comes from a retainer of the Date clan who reportedly traveled with his tea tools wherever he went, including battlefields. He believed that as long as he could make tea, he could return to his center, even under siege. Today, some scholars view these habits as eccentric, even obsessive. Was it a coping mechanism or a spiritual discipline taken to its natural conclusion? The historical record doesn't say, but as you pour the final bowl for your fellow retainers, you understand what words can't capture. You've changed, yes, but more than that, you've begun to change others. Later that night, as the moon rises behind the cypress trees, you walk the estate alone. You pass the training field, empty and glistening with dew. You pause by the koi pond. The surface is still. Your reflection stares back, older, calmer. You sit, you pour one last bowl, and you drink it in silence, not to complete a ritual, but because your hands remembered before your mind even asked. The first frost arrives with quiet ceremony. You step into the garden at dawn, and the world has shifted overnight. The moss crunches faintly under your feet. The leaves are rimmed with silver. The breath from your nose floats like incense, curling toward nothing. Inside the tea room, the hearth has been sunken into the floor for winter, a tradition known as row season. The crackle of fire replaces the soft gurgle of summer kettles. You kneel closer to the heat now, both for warmth and for presence. The scroll you choose this morning reads, "Stillness reveals all things." You believe it now, because today your master does something strange. He asks you to prepare a bowl for him. The moment feels heavier than armor. You bow, you begin. You notice, for the first time, how many small habits you've kept, how your fingers now find their places without searching, how your breath follows the steam, how silence feels less like emptiness and more like gravity. Your master sips and smiles. He does not speak, not until the tea has cooled and the coals begin to dim. Then he says, "The sword is a shout, tea is a whisper, but both must be honest." That night, an old friend from your early training returns to the estate. He's louder than you remember, brags about a recent duel, scoffs at the poetry on the scroll, asks if you've abandoned real strength for warm water and fan dances. You do not answer, not directly. You simply ask him to stay for tea. He rolls his eyes but agrees. You keep the ceremony brief. No flourishes, no lecture, just the warmth of the bowl and the discipline of motion. He drinks in silence, and when it's over, he says, I didn't know it could feel like that. You say nothing because he already knows. Here's your curious detail. During the Edo period, samurai could be demoted or disciplined for improper conduct during a tea ceremony. Slurping, speaking out of turn, or showing impatience could mark a warrior as uncultured, or worse, undisciplined. This idea fascinates historians. Was the tea ceremony a genuine moral training, or just another method of social control? Some argue it elevated behavior. Others say it enforced hierarchy through manners disguised as meditation. But to you, the debate doesn't matter anymore, because the change is real. You feel it in your bones. You've become not just a student of tea, but its servant. And something about that feels freer than you ever expected. The following morning, a boy, perhaps no older than 12, is brought to the estate. His father, a low-ranking samurai, has asked that he be trained in courtly disciplines. He is skittish. He bows too quickly. He spills water trying to pour it. But he watches. Oh, he watches. And you remember yourself, kneeling on stiff tatami, legs numb, brain screaming. You remember how silence once felt like punishment, how the weight of the bowl seemed ridiculous, how you thought composure was a costume. Now it's your turn to guide. You show him how to fold the cloth, how to center the ladle, how to listen to the kettle's shun-shun, the soft boil said to sound like wind through pines. He doesn't get it, not yet, but he will, because this is how it starts, with steam, with stillness, with a whisper. Winter deepens. The estate sinks into hush, blanketed in snow. The garden path disappears beneath a soft white veil. Lanterns flicker early in the day now. Even the birds seem to sing more quietly. You keep the tea room warm, its hearth glowing like a hidden sun. Each morning, you brush the tatami free of ash. You wipe the lacquered surfaces until they reflect the firelight in gentle curves. You drink tea alone more often now, not for training, not for hosting, but simply to return to yourself. And in this quiet, something new begins to grow. Not ambition, not pride, but Ikatib's peace. One day you're invited to a remote mountain temple, one known for housing the bowl without a maker. A ceramic piece said to have appeared without origin, without artist, passed from monk to monk for over 100 years. The journey is long and slow, the path icy. You arrive at dusk, cheeks numb, fingers stiff. The monks greet you with smiles and few words. They offer no fire, no feast, just tea. And there it is, the bowl. It's simple, pale gray, with a tiny spiral crack near the rim. But when you hold it, it feels alive, warm, even before the tea is poured. Balanced in a way you can't explain, like it knows how to sit in your hands better than you do. You drink. The tea is bitter, strong, and perfect. Afterward, the elder monk says softly, "The bowl has no story. It just is, like the moment." And then, no more. You return the bowl, you bow. And somehow, that silence feels like a blessing. A peculiar historical note. Some tea masters refused to sign their work. They believed that to attach a name was to limit the meaning. To this day, scholars argue over the origins of certain bowls and utensils. Was it humility or a way to transcend self? Some claim it was rebellion against ego. Others believe it made the object sacred by erasing its creator. Whatever the truth, you begin to understand, tea is not about being seen, it's about seeing. Spring returns, shy at first. The snow melts in patches, revealing moss like emeralds beneath your feet. The trees bud slowly, their branches trembling with new life. You host a final tea gathering before traveling again. This time, you invite no warriors, no scholars, just your old master and the boy. The scroll reads, "Each moment is the only moment." You serve them both in silence. The boy stirs nervously, then watches your hands. Your master sips with closed eyes, and for one breathless, blooming instant, you feel the past and future collapse into now. This bowl, this breath, this silence. Afterward, your master says, "You've gone farther than I expected." You bow. "I only poured tea." He smiles. "Exactly." That night, as you pack your tools for the journey ahead, you wrap your own tea bowl carefully. It's still the same one, slightly lopsided, glaze imperfect, but it has carried your hands through years. You understand now. The bowl isn't just an object, it's a mirror. And now it holds you, forever steeping.